Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I was feeling pretty good about the first voiceover video that I put out recently, so I thought I might try to make this a more consistent thing where I record my process of working on stuff while talking about various art-related topics and giving advice or help where I can. In my last video, I mentioned that folks could drop requests for certain topics or questions that they have down in the comments, and someone brought up a topic that I thought would be really awesome to talk about. How did you get the brain power to say f it and start your comic because imposter syndrome is one big bit? After mulling it over in my mind, I figured out a short answer and a long answer that both meet at one conclusion. So let's talk about it. I just want to start off by saying that most of this will be purely of my own opinion and experience. Being a content creator is a unique adventure for everyone, and not everyone can work off the same schedule or method. With that in mind, I'm going to talk about how I personally worked to overcome imposter syndrome and my hesitation when it comes to making comics, and hopefully you might find something I say to be helpful or relatable. First off, let's talk about imposter syndrome. What is it? Well, it can take different forms based off of the context in which someone is experiencing it, whether in personal life, relationships, or work life. It's an intense form of self-doubt that causes a person to feel as if they are a fraud, and that they are merely deceiving others around them into thinking that they know what they're doing. It's a feeling of inadequacy that even highly achieved artists, celebrities, and politicians have talked about experiencing. Imposter syndrome is an extremely tricky mindset that many of us have dealt with at one point or another, even if we didn't know how to identify it at the time it was happening. According to a survey conducted in 2017, imposter syndrome is heavily experienced by the demographic of young adults in the workplace. While imposter syndrome is not considered a mental illness, it is known to branch off heavily from those of us with anxiety or an intense fear of failure. If this is something you struggle with, it's more common than you think, and you are certainly not alone. That being said, let's dig in. The short answer for how to overcome imposter syndrome is that, drumroll please, you just have to do it. Whatever it is for you. A comic, a book, a song, a project, anything. If you ever want to get the ball rolling, you have to start somewhere. The short answer is to stop thinking, stop second-guessing yourself, and just dive into making stuff. But that probably isn't what you were hoping to hear, was it? Yeah, I know. So let's talk about the long answer. If you are a content creator, your chances of living life free from experiencing any imposter syndrome whatsoever are fairly slim. The longer you go on in this field of careers, the more aware you'll become of yourself and those who share similar skill sets. This is especially true in this day and age, where social media exposes us to other artists constantly, which is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, you get to consume so much art and have infinite chances to gather tons of inspiration. On the other hand, however, it is all too easy to eventually begin comparing you and your content to that of those you admire. I am of the opinion that constant exposure to amazing art that is just a mere thumb scroll away on a smartphone and imposter syndrome can and will often go together. Something that I find to be really important to keep in mind during times like this is that other artists are not your competition. Whether they are those insanely talented 14-year-olds churning out hyper-realistic digital paintings, or artists who wield a godlike skill after 40 years of hard practice, they are not your competition, and their presence does not serve a sole purpose to make you feel bad about yourself. Nobody else's journey in learning to create is able to negate the honest time and effort that you have put into your own craft, even if that's hard to believe sometimes. Those sorts of comparisons are not fair to you, and they're not fair to those other artists. This is something I have personally struggled with. Unlearning this mentality is much easier said than done. Most days I feel inspired by what I see on my Twitter and Instagram timelines, But some days I feel incompetent and as if I can't compare. It's even worse if I'm having a day where I'm not able to draw what I want, when it feels like my hand has decided to stop cooperating after about a decade of training and passion. You know, those fun days where you can't draw, so you gaslight yourself into believing that you never could in the first place, and that you're somehow a fraud and a sham? Yeah, baby, that's imposter syndrome. Roughly 3 years ago, I began dreaming up concepts for my own original comic, Pink Sugar. I would spend hours laying awake at night while staring at the ceiling and thinking of all kinds of adventures for my characters to go on. I would daydream about how cool it would be to put my creations into the world and help young queer people feel seen and understood in the same way that graphic novels were my own sanctuary when I was growing up. Comics would often provide a way for younger me to see pieces of myself in the characters and the creators who made them. However, I kept putting off actually making my comic because I was worried. I wanted to wait until my art was, quote, good enough to justify making a comic. So I waited, and waited, and waited, and I kept waiting because I never considered myself good enough to start making the comic of my dreams. And nothing got done. All my cool ideas stayed up in my head and were locked away, because I was worried that my art wouldn't live up to the grand ideas stored in my brain. Eventually, during a nightly conversation about my aspirations, my girlfriend said the most inspiring words to me. "Why don't you just make it?" And she was right. If you have an idea for something you want to create, but you keep putting it off until you're better at your craft, that cool idea of yours is never going to happen. It's not going to exist. Because the invisible goalpost you have made for yourself will keep moving farther and farther away. That's not fair to you. Even as I was starting to draw my comic, I was still doubting myself pretty hard. It took quite some time for that feeling to fade, but it never would have faded in the first place if I hadn't started working on my comic. So how did I begin to work past the hardship of imposter syndrome? First off, I started a schedule for myself. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I work on things pertaining to my comic. Those are my personal art days. Tuesdays and Thursdays are for commission and hired work. On the days where I develop Pink Sugar, I alternate writing an outline and drawing pages. The outline for my comic consists of a summary of all of the characters, places, important concepts, and themes. Dialogue for each scene is written out like a play script, and settings are described in text detail every time the scene changes. I also type out particular actions, facial expressions, or moods that I want to incorporate for a page. As for actually drawing the pages, my comic page thumbnails always look really silly when I first start sketching them out. They're all scribbly and vague, and you can barely tell what's what. But it's something. I have started putting that page out there. I've gotten the ball rolling, and I have given myself permission to let this grow and exist. In a few days, it will be sketched, lined, and colored, and it will be a beautiful comic page for an idea of mine that I have finally decided is worth creating. It's going to be an amazing queer comic full of pretty art and dynamic characters that I have finally allowed to exist because I chose to stop waiting. I work on the outline and my pages interchangeably because I personally find that the two parts of this whole will inspire each other as I'm working on them. As I'm writing my outline, I get ideas for how I want a scene to play out or how I want a character to look. As I draw the characters out on their pages, I get a better feel for their personality and things that they might say or do. I try to keep my outlines from being too specific because I don't want to restrict myself from ideas that might occur to me as I'm actually working on the page itself. I've realized that setting up dedicated days in which I spend time to focus on this project has really helped with improving my drive and passion. Drawing Pink Sugar has also been a learning process in and of itself as I started to develop a consistent art style that I would not have found if I hadn't started actually making the comic. That being said, The reality of this situation is that if you've struggled with imposter syndrome, it's very likely that you will struggle with it again, and again, and again. It's never really truly gone. In my experience, there's not really a cure for it. There will be days where you don't know if you can create, days where nothing will come out the way you want it to, leaving you feeling like you're living a lie. The big secret, the big trick, is that you simply just have to learn to cope with it the best you can. You have to learn to take charge against what your doubtful brain is telling you. When I was in high school, actually, my art class teacher printed out these funny little papers that said, "This certifies that the bearer has permission to make as much really terrible bad art as they need to make, and it'll be okay." While it seemed sort of silly at the time, it's a message that has really stuck with me through the years, and I actually still have that certificate tucked away in a scrapbook as a fond reminder. On days where imposter syndrome is getting to you, and you still want to create, give yourself permission to make as much bad art as you want. Tossing crappy art out into the universe is far more beneficial for you than never giving yourself the chance to try. So many of us are afraid of failing, and we allow that to keep us from pursuing the dreams and goals that we have. When it comes to making something like a comic, I will also add this. Think of the people that you want to make it for. Think of how much it will mean to them when you do. I grew up reading graphic novels, comics, and manga. Anytime I saw a character that I could relate to even just a little bit, it absolutely meant the world to me, as if some random adult creator was telling me, personally, that they saw me and was telling me that they knew I existed. A character that comes to mind is Carolina Dean from the Runaways series, and how she was such a comforting existence to have when I was small and questioning so much about my identity as a young teen. Something that drives me to make Pink Sugar is that I want to pass that energy forward, and I want to be that for someone else because I know how much it means as a reader. On days where I cannot create for myself, I create for the future where my comic really means something to someone. For the days where imposter syndrome is kicking you while you're down, remember that everything you have accomplished so far, everything that you've created and started and made and inspired, has never been just good luck. You are not a human being functioning on deceit. You are someone who has spent a significant amount of time pouring love, thought, and passion into a craft that gives a purpose to your life. Other artists are not your competition, and all you need to do is just create and learn at your own pace. You are good enough for the praise you receive. You are good enough for the support you are given and the kind words that others give to you. You know more than you give yourself credit for. You have more skill stored inside of you than you think you do. Self-doubt is an awful beast to fight, but you don't have to do it alone. But most importantly, give yourself the permission to allow your art to exist and get to work. You have to start somewhere, so why not here? Why not now? So there it is. Those are my personal thoughts on imposter syndrome and how I personally cope with having it. If even just a crumb of this has been helpful to you, I've accomplished my goal with making this video. I wish you the best of luck in pursuing the goals and dreams that you have for your creative career. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, commenting, or subscribing to my channel. If you would like to read my comic in the early works, as each page comes fresh off the press, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and even receive cool stuff in the mail like stickers, prints, and hand-drawn sketches. You're also welcome to drop any questions about art or creating in the comments, and I will try to the best of my ability to answer them in a future video. I'm not an expert, but hey, we can learn together. Additionally, links to my social media pages, online store, official website, and commission information are down below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.